He asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation. Her heart fluttered with promise. In the days that followed, their conversations over cups of coffee stretched into hours. Christopher admired her ambition and sense of wonder. Melissa was captivated by his intelligence and the mysterious heir he married, like he knew secrets about how the world worked. With each passing day, her feelings grew deeper. Not just admiration, but a vulnerable trust she rarely offered so quickly. She would lie awake at night, clutching her phone, smiling at his last message, hoping the next would come before dawn. By the time Melissa graduated, they were officially a couple, in love and brimming with shared plans for the future. She imagined a life filled with big city dreams, love's warm glow, and the kind of success story that would make her parents proud. But no fairy tale is complete without shadows. Even in those early days, there were fleeting moments when Christopher would evade certain topics about his past or make cryptic remarks about trusting no one. Sometimes she'd catch a flicker in his eyes, like he was seeing something she couldn't. It unsettled her, but she told herself love meant accepting the whole person, even the mysterious parts. Melissa brushed it aside as mere eccentricity. After all, everyone has secrets, right? They were married the following autumn, in a lavish ceremony under a canopy of golden leaves. Melissa wore a delicate white gown, her cheeks pink with joy, while Christopher looked every bit the dashing self-made millionaire. The world seemed open and wide, full of possibility. As she took his hand and whispered her vows, her voice trembled, not with doubt, but with the magnitude of her belief in them, in their future. Little did Melissa know her journey was only beginning. After the wedding, Melissa moved into Christopher's sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house, ensconced by high hedges and electric gates, was a fortress of solitude, reflecting Christopher's desire for privacy. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and art pieces from across the globe adorned the walls. Each room was styled with an elegant blend of classic architecture and modern furnishings. And from the second-floor balcony, you could see the city skyline glimmering at night like a sea of stars. For Melissa, it felt like stepping into a dream someone else had written, beautiful, extravagant, and just out of touch with reality. It was surreal stepping into that world. She had grown up in a simple household where leftover casserole was considered the height of luxury. Here, the staff insisted on preparing elaborate meals served on porcelain plates with gold trim. There was a live-in housekeeper, a gardener who doubled as a handyman, and even a chauffeur for special occasions. At first, Melissa felt guilty about the indulgence. She missed the clatter of her mother's pots and pans, the squeaky laundry room door, things that once annoyed her but now felt like anchors to her old, honest life. She would often sneak to the kitchen to help clean her own dishes or do laundry just to feel grounded. He asked for her number, and she gave it without a second thought, her heart fluttering with anticipation. In the days that followed, their conversations over lattes and quiet corners of downtown cafes stretched on for hours. Jonathan admired Rachel's drive and her wide-eyed view of the world. Rachel, in turn, was drawn to his sharp intellect and the enigmatic way he spoke, as if he carried hidden knowledge of how the world truly worked. Each word between them felt electric, filled with possibility. Rachel found herself replaying their talks at night, clinging to his every phrase, as if trying to memorize the language of a new, thrilling future. By the time Rachel graduated, they were a couple. Deeply in love and full of dreams, they wove together like a shared blueprint for the future. She envisioned a life painted in the hues of the city's skyline, warmed by love and lit with the kind of success story her parents would boast about with pride. But even the most perfect stories come with shadows. From the beginning, there were occasional moments when Jonathan would dodge questions about his history or drop cryptic lines about never placing too much trust in anyone. Sometimes she caught a flicker of darkness behind his easy charm, a hesitation when she asked about his childhood or past relationships. But she told herself love required faith, faith that the pieces would make sense in time. Rachel dismissed these as quirks, eccentricities that came with brilliance. After all, who didn't have secrets? They married that fall in a lavish ceremony beneath a canopy of golden maple leaves. Rachel wore a delicate ivory gown, her cheeks flushed with happiness, while Jonathan embodied the image of the handsome self-made millionaire. The world lay before them, ripe with opportunity and promise. She remembered gripping his hand tightly as they exchanged vows, a silent plea echoing in her mind. Please let this be forever. What Rachel didn't realize was that her real journey was just beginning. After the wedding, Rachel moved into Jonathan's expansive estate, tucked along the cliffs just beyond the city's limits. Shielded by towering hedges and an electronic gate, the property was a sanctuary of privacy, reflecting Jonathan's quiet nature. Inside, the floors shimmered with polished stone beneath glittering chandeliers, and artwork collected from around the world lined the pristine walls. Each space was styled with a seamless blend of timeless elegance and sleek modern touches. From the balcony on the second floor, the distant city lights twinkled at night, a reflection of the stars above. For Rachel, it felt unreal to step into that kind of life. She had grown up in a home where dinner leftovers were a luxury. Here, staff served multi-course meals on dishes rimmed with gold. There was a live-in housekeeper, a gardener who handled everything from rose bushes to roof leaks, and even a driver who stood ready for every formal occasion. At first, Rachel felt an ache of guilt over the indulgence. Sometimes, she would sit alone in the massive kitchen late at night, cradling a cup of tea and trying to remember the creak of the floorboards in her childhood home, the sound that once grounded her. More than once, she'd sneak into the kitchen to wash her own coffee mug or toss a load of laundry into the machine. Small acts that helped her stay grounded in a world that seemed too polished to be real. Yet beneath all the luxury, she found flashes of true joy. She and Jonathan would spend long evenings discussing advances in digital tech, dreams of charitable initiatives, and the possibility of one day launching a foundation to support underprivileged youth. Those conversations stirred something deep in Rachel, a sense of purpose, a belief that love could be more than romance. It could be a partnership aimed at creating something good in the world. Jonathan seemed to have a boundless well of passion, always building, always envisioning. Whenever he vanished into a late-night business call, he'd return with a gentle kiss on her forehead and assure her that every sacrifice he made was for their shared future. Each kiss, though brief, carried the unspoken promise of better days. She clung to them, even as the hours alone grew longer, and Rachel believed him. In her eyes, he was unstoppable. Still, little red flags flickered here and there. Jonathan had a tendency for abrupt mood swings, especially when specific calls came through. He'd excuse himself mid-conversation, disappearing to another room to answer in hushed, clipped tones. Once, Rachel overheard a muffled dispute in his study, something about a failing deal and tense negotiations. When she timidly asked if everything was okay, Jonathan chalked it up to business pressure. Nothing she needed to worry about. His tone was dismissive, but she chose to believe his words, pushing down the unease gnawing at her. They rarely entertained guests at the estate. For someone as influential and affluent as Jonathan, he seemed almost reclusive. He remained friendly enough at professional events, but rarely invited friends or business associates to their home. He said he cherished his privacy, and Rachel accepted that at first. After all, she had grown up in a close-knit community. Still, over time, the isolation of their social life began to weigh on her. The silence in the vast house sometimes echoed louder than any argument. Whenever doubt crept in, Rachel would recall the man who once captivated her. The man who talked about the future like it was something they were building together. She convinced herself that Jonathan's evasiveness was just part of surviving the high-stakes world he lived in. She chose patience, determined to be the steady partner he could rely on. She whispered to herself in the dark, "This is just a phase. He loves me. He'll come back to me fully. Soon." But what she didn't know was that these early uncertainties would evolve into much deeper mysteries. A year into their marriage, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. The revelation brought a whirlwind of excitement and nervousness. How would Jonathan react? Would fatherhood bring them closer? When she shared the news, his face lit up. He scooped her into his arms, beaming, genuinely moved. In the weeks that followed, he made a visible effort to be present, postponing business trips, attending doctor's appointments, and even picking out baby names with childlike enthusiasm. Rachel dared to believe they had turned a corner, that the dream she held on to was finally becoming real. For a while it felt like they were entering a golden chapter, but that feeling didn't last. Soon, Jonathan's phone became an almost constant companion, buzzing at all hours with urgent messages. Calls pulled him away mid-conversation. He began traveling more frequently, murmuring about company expansions and complex deals in barely audible tones. When he returned home, his shoulders carried the weight of tension, and the easy smiles he once wore became rare. Rachel, now managing the emotional tides of pregnancy, found herself torn. Should she press for the truth and risk conflict, or keep faith in her husband and remain quietly supportive? Each night, as she placed her hands on her growing belly, she whispered promises to her unborn child, trying to silence the doubts screaming in her mind. One night, early into her second trimester, she experienced a sharp wave of abdominal pain that sent her into a panic. At the emergency room, doctors confirmed it was stress-induced cramping. She was advised to rest, and above all, to worry less. When she tried to explain to Jonathan how terrified she'd been, he merely said, "Everything's going to be fine," kissed her forehead, and walked out the door to another hastily arranged meeting. Rachel felt the loneliness settle in, heavy, consuming. She longed for his presence, his support. Occasionally, Jonathan would try to show he cared, bringing her herbal tea or rubbing her back when the aches flared up. But these gestures were brief, quickly overshadowed by his frequent absences. Rachel convinced herself not to complain. She reminded herself that Jonathan was making sacrifices for their child, for a future that would be filled with ease and opportunity. She found solace in the little one growing inside her, whispering quiet words of love to her unborn baby whenever Jonathan was away. But the more distant he became, the more doubt crept into her heart. Old rumors about shady business dealings started to resurface in her mind. She thought back to that tense phone call she'd overheard, the veiled threats, the quiet fury. Something about Jonathan's empire felt off. Still, every time she thought about confronting him, something stopped her. He was her husband, the father of her child. Didn't loyalty mean trusting him, even when the details didn't add up? But as her due date drew nearer, so did her anxiety. Rachel had pictured Jonathan at her side in the delivery room, holding her hand, telling her everything would be okay. Now, she wasn't even sure he would answer her calls. Even her parents, still living back in Willow Ridge, began to worry. Her mother gently offered to come stay with her in the city, but Rachel declined. She didn't want to intrude on Jonathan's need for privacy. She clung to a fragile belief that, in the end, Jonathan would put family first. It wasn't just wishful thinking, it was the prayer she repeated every night. Then, one quiet evening about a month before her due date, Rachel was looking for a pen in Jonathan's study when she stumbled upon a sealed envelope. It bore the name Ariel Sutton, a name she didn't recognize, and inside was a hotel receipt for a luxury suite. The dates matched a time when Jonathan had said he was out of town for work. The bill was extravagant: room service for two, couple spa treatments, late-night wine orders. Her stomach twisted. The dates lined up with the months she'd spent navigating pregnancy mostly alone. She remembered the late-night texts, the secretive phone calls, the way he seemed colder every time he returned. Something deep inside her sank. That night, when Jonathan walked through the door, Rachel was waiting. His face drained of color for a brief second before he forced a casual laugh. "It's just business," he said, plucking the receipt from her fingers. "Ariel is a prospective investor. We had to entertain her. That's all, Rachel. Relax." But Rachel caught the tremor in his hand, the way his breath shortened. Doubt began to seep into her chest like cold air through a crack in the window. The man she had once trusted without hesitation, the man she had given everything to, might be lying. Worse, he might be betraying her in the cruelest way. A cold weight settled in her stomach, the kind of dread that doesn't shout but whispers, persistent and quiet, eroding certainty little by little. The thought that Jonathan could be carrying on an affair while she endured morning sickness and prepared to bring their child into the world made her stomach churn with something far more bitter than nausea. How could he smile at her, touch her belly, and speak of baby names while possibly sharing nights in hotel rooms with someone else? In the days that followed, he tried to smooth things over, leaving extravagant flower arrangements in the living room, draping shimmering jewelry on her vanity like offerings for peace. But the gestures felt empty. Rachel's instincts screamed that something vital between them had shifted. Trust, the very foundation of their marriage, was starting to crack right in front of her. As much as she wanted to believe his words, a quiet, relentless voice echoed in her mind. He's hiding something. Each night, she stared at the ceiling, replaying his words, looking for sincerity, for any hint that her fears were misplaced. But there was none. Needing perspective, Rachel turned to her lifelong friend, Marissa, the same friend who had given her that extra ticket to the gala all those years ago. When Rachel told her about the hotel receipt and Jonathan's brush-off, Marissa's reaction was swift and sharp. "You're carrying his baby," she snapped. "And he's out whining and dining some other woman? That's not business, Rach." Rachel crumpled into tears, overwhelmed by confusion and guilt. Was she overreacting or finally seeing the truth? Which hurt more, the sting of betrayal or the fear that she might be misjudging the man she once loved so deeply? She sobbed into Marissa's arms, whispering, "What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right?" The uncertainty was worse than either answer. At night, she lay awake, hand resting on her belly, trying to untangle the mess in her head. The jewelry, the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the hotel receipt, it all hinted at something larger. But what was it? An affair? Or something else entirely? A financial scandal? Maybe he was hiding trouble in his business. Somehow, Rachel almost hoped it was just a money problem. The idea that Jonathan was cheating on her felt like an insult to everything they had built. Her mind spun with scenarios, wrapping her in a fog of anxiety that left her breathless. She tried journaling, tried prayer, tried silence, but nothing eased the constant thrum of worry that kept her awake until dawn. With her due date fast approaching, Rachel knew she needed answers. Real ones. She could no longer live in the shadows of half-truths. Her child deserved honesty, and a father who didn't live behind locked doors and whispered excuses. But Rachel couldn't have known that the truth she was so desperate to uncover would pale in comparison to what was still to come. One late evening, just days before her due date, a sharp, wrenching pain surged through her abdomen. She had been in the kitchen, sipping ginger tea to settle her nerves, when the pain struck so hard she dropped the cup. It shattered on the tile floor as her body doubled over. Fear crashed through her in an instant. She was completely alone. Jonathan had left that morning for another critical meeting across the state. The housekeeper had taken the weekend off to visit family. Rachel gasped through the contractions, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. Her first instinct was to call Jonathan, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. Each contraction hit harder than the last, and Rachel knew she couldn't afford to wait. With trembling hands and a shaky voice, she dialed emergency services, explaining that she was in labor and completely alone. The dispatcher calmly assured her that help was on the way. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. They gently lifted her onto a stretcher as she clutched her phone tightly, still hoping Jonathan would return her call. Every second stretched like an ache in her chest, the silence of his absence echoing louder than the siren's cry. The ambulance's sirens screamed through the night as they rushed toward the hospital. Rachel lay there, tears slipping down her cheeks. This moment was supposed to be one of joy, shared with the man she loved. Instead, she was being swept away in fear and isolation. At the hospital, doctors and nurses sprang into action. Rachel felt herself spinning, lost in a blur of pain and heartbreak. She tried to concentrate on the baby, breathing through each wave of agony as the medical team urged her forward. The clock above the bed ticked so slowly it felt like time itself had frozen. Between contractions, Rachel checked her phone over and over again. Still nothing from Jonathan. Each time she brushed her hair away from her forehead, she prayed that the next flash would be his name lighting up the screen. But the void remained. After endless hours of labor, through sobs and clenched fists, Rachel gave one final push. A sharp cry pierced the air, the unmistakable, beautiful sound of new life. Relief and joy surged through her. The tears that poured from her eyes were a mix of joy and sorrow. A nurse gently placed the baby boy in her arms. He had a delicate face, a tuft of dark hair, and tightly shut eyes that already looked curious about the world. In that brief moment, everything else, the empty phone, the cold room, faded away as only his breathing mattered. In that moment, Rachel felt a bond so strong it silenced everything else. "I'm here," she whispered to him. "I'll always be here." When she glanced at the clock again, dawn was breaking. Jonathan still hadn't come. She imagined him in some distant city, or worse, in a hotel room with Ariel. The ache in her chest nearly eclipsed the physical pain she had just endured. But she wouldn't allow that hurt to taint her baby's first moments. She named him Adam, a name Jonathan had once suggested during one of their happier nights. Despite everything, Rachel still wanted their son to feel some thread of connection to his father. The next morning, Marissa burst into the hospital room, out of breath and wide-eyed with concern. She pulled Rachel into a soft embrace and cradled baby Adam with tenderness. When she asked about Jonathan, Rachel simply shook her head. The humiliation was sharp and unforgiving. Yet in that moment, as she watched her son sleeping peacefully in Marissa's arms, she felt a fierce protectiveness bloom. No matter what, she would never let him feel abandoned. In that moment, Rachel understood something clearly. She was, for all intents and purposes, alone in this new chapter of motherhood, and something fierce began to burn inside her. If Jonathan thought he could simply vanish and leave them behind, Rachel would make sure he lived to regret it. After giving birth, Rachel remained in the hospital for several days to recover from the ordeal. She had imagined a steady stream of visitors, Jonathan's business associates, mutual friends, well-wishers. None came. Only Marissa and Rachel's parents, who had driven in from Willow Ridge the moment they heard, stayed faithfully by her side. The absence of Jonathan deepened Rachel's determination to uncover the truth. Physically, she was worn down. Her body ached, and she barely slept, afraid she might miss a call or text from him. Her mother doted on her, bringing thermoses of homemade broth and gently burping baby Adam after feedings. Her father, ever steady, reminded her that she had a home to return to in Willow Ridge if she needed it. Though they never said it aloud, Rachel could feel their quiet fury toward Jonathan simmering beneath their concern. On the morning she was discharged, Rachel felt torn, hopeful to go home, but dreading the void waiting for her there. She cradled Adam tightly to her chest as they stepped into the sharp daylight outside the hospital. Marissa had pulled the car around and offered to drive them. Inside the vehicle, Rachel sat silently, her gaze fixed on the passing city. Just a few months ago, she had joyfully designed a nursery in their estate. Soft pastels, rows of plush animals, imagining the day she and Jonathan would carry their child through the front door together. That dream now felt like a cruel joke. Returning to the estate felt hollow. The echo of her footsteps down the marble hallway only amplified the betrayal. A kind neighbor had left a small gift basket at the gate, but there was no celebration. No Jonathan, no balloons, no homecoming joy. Just Rachel and her newborn in a house that once echoed with promises. Gripped by a flood of emotion, Rachel acted. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Jonathan, clear, direct, and raw. She had delivered their child, and his absence was unforgivable. She needed answers. Her hands shook as she hit send. The message showed delivered, but never read. Hours passed, then a day, then 2, then 3. Still, nothing. Each night as Rachel rocked Adam gently to sleep, sorrow washed over her like the tide. She kissed his tiny forehead and whispered her promise to protect him, no matter what came. In the soft glow of the nursery lamp, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. Eyes tired, but steady. A woman transformed, no longer uncertain, no longer waiting. She realized something was starting to take root inside her. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was fighting for Adam's future. This was a turning point, a shift that would lead Rachel to take the decisive steps that lay ahead. If Jonathan thought he could vanish without consequence and go on enjoying his millionaire life untouched, he was wrong. The gentle, ever-patient Rachel was starting to evolve into someone ready to confront the truth. The heartbreak had chipped away at her former self, revealing someone fierce, deliberate, and unwilling to be deceived any longer. And that meant pulling back every layer of secrecy Jonathan had so carefully hidden. Determined to uncover it all, Rachel made the decision to hire a private investigator. Marissa referred her to a man named Dominic Price, an ex-cop known for his relentless drive and refusal to back down. He arrived at the estate on a damp afternoon, dressed in a worn leather jacket and wearing a weathered expression that said he'd seen it all. After a brief exchange, Dominic pulled out a small notepad and got straight to the point. Rachel began recounting everything: the hotel receipt with the name Ariel Sutton, the sudden business trips, the whispered phone calls, and most devastating of all, Jonathan's absence during her labor. Her voice quivered at times, but each word carried a quiet fire, fueled by months of confusion and pain. Dominic listened closely, his eyes sharp and calculating. He asked for anything that might help: phone logs, credit card records, flight bookings. Rachel gave him whatever she could find. The more they dug, the more obvious the inconsistencies became. With a firm voice, Dominic promised to begin the investigation right away. "I've seen men like this before," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "They think they're untouchable. Don't worry, I'll get to the truth." His certainty gave Rachel a lifeline in a sea of doubt. When he left, Rachel felt a mix of relief and dread. What if the truth was even worse than she feared? Her thoughts churned endlessly. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, bracing herself for the storm that might come with every new fact. Less than a week later, Dominic called with an early update. He had tracked Jonathan to multiple upscale hotels across the state, all under various aliases. Sometimes he registered as C. Dalton, other times as J. Davis. The pattern that emerged didn't suggest just one affair, but a series of covert liaisons, or perhaps suspicious business dealings cloaked as personal visits. The evidence didn't stop there. Dominic had also uncovered several offshore bank accounts with large deposits and withdrawals made at erratic intervals, enough to raise suspicions of potential money laundering or other financial crimes. But the most jarring discovery came during a deeper background check. Rachel had always known Jonathan used to be Jonathan Delaney, and she had assumed he changed his surname for personal or branding reasons. But Dominic's research revealed something darker. Jonathan had a sealed legal history, including allegations of fraud and embezzlement linked to a failed tech startup he had launched fresh out of college. The charges had never gone to court due to insufficient evidence, but the implications were clear. Jonathan wasn't the man he claimed to be. Each new revelation struck Rachel like a blow. Her chest tightened as the truth peeled away the last pieces of the illusion she had married. Each revelation slammed into Rachel's heart, threatening to shatter it. The innocent trust she once clung to was gone. Now she saw things clearly. She had fallen for a man who might be entangled in a world of deceit, criminal schemes, and secret affairs. As she held baby Adam close, a storm of questions swirled in her mind. How could she shield him from the consequences of a father who might have built an empire on lies? If Jonathan was involved in illegal dealings, this was no longer just about betrayal. It could spiral into public disgrace, financial collapse, or even danger for their child. But Rachel refused to be paralyzed by fear. She steadied herself. Her first priority had to be protecting Adam's future. If Jonathan had been funneling funds into offshore accounts, she needed to make sure she and Adam would not be left vulnerable. She reached out to a family law attorney named Patricia Yates, a woman known for her fierce advocacy and sharp mind. After hearing Rachel's story, Patricia moved quickly, gathering records, drafting paperwork, and preparing for what could become a very public divorce and custody battle. The course was set. Rachel's heartbreak was giving way to resolve. She would no longer sit in silence while Jonathan endangered or disrespected them. If he wouldn't return willingly to take responsibility, she would drag him into the daylight, even if it meant standing before a judge to do it. With legal proceedings beginning and Dominic's investigation expanding, Rachel took one more chance to contact Jonathan directly. She sent him a short but clear email outlining everything she had learned: the suspicious hotel stays, the offshore accounts, the sealed legal history. She demanded that he return home to face his responsibilities. She warned that if he didn't respond, she would have no choice but to proceed with legal action. Then she waited. Her heart raced each time she refreshed her inbox. But days went by. Nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. Strangely, even Jonathan's normally quiet social media presence had gone dark. His profile showed no recent activity, no public statements, no baby announcements, nothing. Even his company's official website featured only glowing press releases praising his visionary leadership and tech innovations. There were no signs of disruption, no mention of his personal life, his wife, or his newborn son. It was as if he had vanished. Then, late one night, as Rachel rocked Adam gently in the dim nursery light, her phone buzzed. It was Dominic. He sounded urgent. Jonathan had been seen at an exclusive private club downtown. He hadn't been alone. The woman he was with matched the description of Ariel Sutton. Dominic hadn't been able to snap a photo in time, but he was confident it was them. Rachel's heart pounded, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was fury. A mother's fury. How dare Jonathan strut around town with another woman while abandoning his own son? Fueled by fury and heartbreak, Rachel coordinated a plan with Dominic and Marissa to confront him. Rumors had it that Jonathan regularly attended high-profile business gatherings at a penthouse downtown. If he was bold enough to make public appearances, Rachel would ensure he faced her directly. The plan was simple. Marissa would gain access to the event as a +1 of a well-known investor, then text Dominic and Rachel once Jonathan was spotted. The goal was to catch him by surprise, before he could make another slick escape. 2 nights later, Rachel sat in a parked car a block away from the shimmering skyscraper where the function was being held. Her heart pounded as she watched luxury sedans line up, dropping off guests in designer evening wear. A message from Marissa popped up. Jonathan was inside, dressed in a navy suit, accompanied by a striking woman with jet black hair. Dominic, positioned nearby, looked toward Rachel and gave her a quick nod. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice edged with concern. Rachel clenched her fists, the memory of giving birth alone still raw. The sleepless nights with Adam and the stinging betrayal of Jonathan's lies still fresh in her bones. The image of Adam's tiny fingers wrapped around hers flashed in her mind, reigniting her purpose. "I have to," she whispered. With that, she stepped out of the car, her legs shaky with adrenaline and emotion. The elevator ride to the penthouse was quiet, tense. The mirrored walls showed her a reflection she barely recognized, a woman shaped by pain but hardened by resolve. She straightened her posture, inhaled deeply, and whispered to herself, "For Adam." When the doors opened, she stepped into a lavish scene filled with soft jazz, clinking glasses, and whispered conversations among the elite. Spotting Marissa near the rear of the room, Rachel pushed her way through the crowd, eyes darting across the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns, and there he was. Jonathan stood by a marble fireplace, leaning in close to a glamorous woman in a shimmering dress. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Her steps quickened. As she approached, heads turned. The crowd quieted. Jonathan looked up, his expression frozen in disbelief. "Rachel," his voice barely made it past his lips. She didn't pause. "How dare you vanish when your son was born?" she said, her voice low but vibrating with rage. "How dare you ignore every call, every message?" Their eyes locked. Rachel didn't flinch. The weight of every sleepless night, every unanswered question hung between them like a storm about to break. The woman beside him, undoubtedly Ariel Sutton, gave Rachel a pointed glare before stepping aside with an annoyed huff. Jonathan looked momentarily stunned, his mouth opening but no words coming. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some sympathetic, others intrigued. Finally, Jonathan spoke. "Not here," he muttered, lowering his voice as he reached out to guide Rachel away from the crowd. But she pulled her arm back sharply. "You don't get to hush me away," she snapped. "I've spent months in silence," Rachel snapped. "We talk now, in front of everyone." A collective gasp swept through the crowd, and a heavy silence blanketed the room. Rachel's voice, sharp and steady, sliced through the air like a blade, cracking the polished veneer of luxury and control. She felt the power shift tangibly, as if years of suppression were shedding off her shoulders in an instant. This was the moment everything began to unravel for Jonathan. His face flushed a deep red, a mixture of rage and panic flaring in his eyes. It was clear he was caught, torn between brushing her off in public and recognizing the danger she posed. Rachel knew too much. Too much that could destroy everything he had built, if it ever came to light. He inhaled deeply, trying to save face, and led her into a shadowy alcove off to the side of the suite. Dominic and Marissa stayed within view, prepared to step in if Jonathan made any attempt to flee. In the dimly lit corner, Rachel faced him, her heart pounding, her voice full of the pain she had carried for weeks. Every fiber of her being screamed for justice, for closure. Not just for herself, but for Adam. "How could you leave me to give birth alone?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what that was like?" She raised her phone, showing him the screen filled with desperate texts and missed calls. Jonathan raked a hand through his hair, his voice unsteady. "Rachel, you don't understand the pressure I've been under." Her eyes narrowed. "Pressure? That doesn't justify walking out on your wife and your child." She stepped in closer, her voice low but charged. "I know about Ariel. I know about the offshore accounts. And I know about your sealed legal record. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Her words landed with the force of a gavel, and for once, Jonathan didn't have a ready comeback. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He exhaled, as if trying to compose himself. "There were deals I couldn't close with you constantly questioning me," he said, his tone cold. "That's why I had to manage things on my own." His eyes darted toward Dominic and Marissa, clearly calculating the risk. "If those investments go public, it'll ruin me." Rachel shook her head, appalled. "Your reputation? That's all you care about? You have a son, Jonathan, a child who hasn't even seen his father's face." For a split second, guilt flickered across Jonathan's expression, but it was quickly buried under the same arrogance she had grown to dread. "I never asked for this to happen now," he muttered. "I had business plans. Things got complicated." Rachel's fury surged. It swelled from every memory of solitude, every night spent in silence, every lie he'd fed her with a smile. She wanted to scream. She wanted to see regret in his face, some sign of remorse. But all she saw was a man obsessed with control and self-preservation. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice trembling. "You're about to lose everything you claim to care about, starting with your family." At that moment, Marissa stepped forward. "I think it's time for you to leave, Jonathan," Rachel said quietly, but her voice carried a sharp edge that made it impossible to ignore. Jonathan hesitated. He glanced toward the door leading back to the crowd, clearly debating whether to spin some narrative for the audience watching from a distance. But in the end, he said nothing. He cast one last venomous look in Rachel's direction and turned on his heel, vanishing into the party. Rachel's eyes blurred with tears. Her knees nearly buckled, but Marissa stepped in, wrapping a steady arm around her shoulders. The warmth of that touch grounded her, reminding her she wasn't alone in this fight. Dominic gave her a quiet, affirming nod, as if to say, "That man just proved everything we suspected." The confrontation had been loud, messy, and public, but it brought a strange clarity. Rachel no longer clung to any illusions about the man she had married. The veil had lifted, and all that remained was a painful, sobering truth. That same night, Rachel called her attorney, Patricia Yates, and recounted everything that had happened. Patricia, calm and calculating, assured her that Jonathan's display of indifference could be valuable evidence in court, proof of emotional neglect, especially in a custody dispute. Rachel felt drained, yet driven. Her heart still ached, but her resolve was unshakable. She would protect her son from the chaos Jonathan brought into their lives. The mother in her was awakening fully now, fierce, vigilant, and unwilling to let lies dictate their future. In the following weeks, Rachel took swift, purposeful action toward reclaiming control of her life. She worked closely with Patricia, laying the legal groundwork to ensure stability for her and Adam. Patricia officially filed for divorce on Rachel's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences, financial deception, and emotional abandonment. Rachel felt a sharp pang as she signed the papers. Not the life she had imagined, but the only path left that felt right. She didn't mourn the marriage anymore. She mourned the woman who had once believed it would last. Meanwhile, Dominic pressed deeper into Jonathan's affairs. He uncovered even more disturbing details. Evidence of funds being moved between offshore accounts and shell companies, all under aliases. The money trail pointed to investor funds being redirected for personal use. Jonathan had been living lavishly, while secretly associating with figures rumored to have links to organized financial crimes. If the evidence ever came to light, Jonathan's entire empire could collapse. But Rachel's focus remained firmly on Adam. She poured her love and attention into motherhood. waking early for feedings, cuddling him close, marveling at his every little smile. She took him for walks around the estate's manicured gardens, trying to create a peaceful, nurturing space amid the storm. In every coo and sleepy blink, she found pieces of herself returning. In those quiet hours, she realized that Adam was her anchor, her reason, her fight. And through him, she rediscovered the strength she never knew she had. Everything she did now was to ensure that his life would remain untouched by the shadows of Jonathan's past. One of the first major changes Rachel made was hiring her own financial advisor. A gentle yet sharp-minded woman named Gabriella Tan entered Rachel's life at just the right time. Gabriella, a trusted financial advisor, helped Rachel open separate bank accounts and taught her how to protect her assets. She also suggested transferring partial ownership of the estate into Rachel's name, if permitted by their state's marital laws. While the legal process could get messy, taking those steps would at least grant Rachel some control over the home she currently lived in. Every conversation with Gabriella felt like a breath of clarity, a small but powerful step toward autonomy. Rachel soaked in the knowledge, realizing how much of her life had been financially tethered to Jonathan's whims. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of power return to her hands. At the same time, Rachel was caught in a whirlwind of emotion. She couldn't shake the guilt, as though she had failed in her vows. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was Jonathan who had dismantled their marriage. Still, the grief lingered. She sometimes found herself missing the man she thought he was. The man who smiled warmly, who spoke tenderly of building a family together. She would hold Adam and recall the nights Jonathan had whispered about the joys of fatherhood. Those memories haunted her. They would surface in quiet moments, like ghosts of a life that never truly existed. Each recollection stung, but also hardened her resolve to protect Adam from illusions. But those memories now felt like relics of a different man. Maybe they always had been. Support began to pour in from unexpected places. Her parents, though heartbroken by what was happening, reminded her that real love shows up when you need it most. Friends from college reached out when word of Jonathan Reed's scandal started circulating. Some offered temporary places to stay, while others sent encouraging messages. Through it all, Marissa stayed by her side, helping with Adam, offering company, making sure Rachel had time to meet with Patricia and Dominic. That steady stream of support became a lifeline. Rachel realized that while Jonathan had abandoned her, the people who truly cared never had. And in their kindness, she found strength. Bit by bit, Rachel felt her emotional wounds begin to scab. She wasn't healed, not even close, but she was gaining strength. The heartbreak no longer consumed her. It was now tempered by something far stronger: purpose. Jonathan might have money and influence, but Rachel had truth. If he thought he could outrun responsibility, he had deeply misjudged her. Amid the legal motions and Dominic's expanding investigation, Rachel was caught off guard when a pristine white envelope arrived at the front gate. It bore Jonathan's personal seal. Inside was a neatly typed letter, brief and calculated. "Rachel, I know our last meeting was chaotic. There are forces involved that you don't fully understand. I did what I had to do for our family, even if it doesn't look that way. Let's meet privately. No lawyers, no investigators. I want to make things right. Jonathan." The letter ended with a phone number and a suggested meeting place: a luxury restaurant in the heart of downtown. Rachel's hands trembled as she finished reading. A surge of disbelief followed by a wave of anger gripped her. After all this time, after the silence and betrayal, this was how he reached out? A storm of emotion battered her. Was this a trap? Another manipulation to get her to drop the case? Or was there something real in those words? A tiny ember of hope flickered in her heart, but she forced herself not to fall into old patterns. That evening, after tucking Adam into bed, Rachel called Patricia to ask for advice. Patricia's response was firm: "Bring Dominic or Marissa with you, just in case. If you choose to meet him, you need witnesses in case things go sideways," Patricia warned firmly. Dominic agreed, offering to sit discreetly at a nearby table during the meeting. Rachel weighed her options. The thought of facing Jonathan again made her stomach churn. But if there was even a sliver of hope for a peaceful resolution, for Adam's sake, she had to try. On a chilly, overcast afternoon, Rachel arrived at the upscale restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back tightly. At a corner table, Jonathan sat waiting, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit. He still wore that polished, magnetic look that had once captivated her completely. When their eyes met, a surge of emotions overwhelmed her: loss, longing, and righteous anger. He stood and leaned in as if to kiss her cheek, but Rachel took a deliberate step back. She sat down, arms folded, steadying herself. "You have 10 minutes," she said flatly. For a brief moment, Jonathan looked hurt, almost surprised by her cold demeanor. But then he dove into his explanation. He spoke of business deals that had turned volatile, shady partners who made threats against his company, and offshore transfers that he claimed were necessary to keep everything afloat. He admitted that Ariel was part of these deals, but insisted it was only for appearances, to lure a high-stakes investor. When Rachel brought up the intimate moment she had witnessed at the penthouse, Jonathan brushed it off as part of the act, a performance to earn trust. It sounded far-fetched, but he delivered the story with practiced ease. Then, leaning in closer, he lowered his voice and glanced around the room. "Rachel, there are people out there who want to take me down. If this goes public, they won't just come after me. They'll tear you and Adam apart too. I'm trying to protect you both." Rachel's eyes narrowed as she studied him. "You call abandoning me while I was giving birth protection?" Her voice wavered but stayed firm. "You call humiliating me in front of the entire city protecting your family?" Jonathan winced. "I was under immense pressure. That deal, it had to close that night. Everything was riding on it. I couldn't afford any distractions. I tried calling." "Don't lie to me," she cut in sharply. "I checked the phone logs. You never called." She took a deep breath, grounding herself. "Maybe you think this is your twisted version of protecting us, but from where I'm sitting, it feels like betrayal." A tense silence fell between them. Finally, Jonathan exhaled, slow and heavy. "I know you don't believe me right now, but give me time. I can prove everything I'm telling you is true." He leaned forward, lowering his voice again. "Withdraw the divorce petition, just for now." "Let me fix this, for Adam's sake," Jonathan pleaded. Rachel stood, her decision already made. "You've had more than enough time," she said firmly. "I won't let you twist this into another story." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "If you truly want to make things right, then show up to mediation. Bring facts. Bring a real willingness to do what's best for your son. Otherwise, don't bother." Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't flinch under his gaze. This time, she wasn't pleading, she was setting boundaries. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Outside, Dominic emerged from his position near the bar, offering her a subtle nod. Rachel felt a wave of relief. She had done the right thing. Jonathan's plea only reinforced how deeply caught he was in his own mess. If redemption was what he wanted, he'd have to earn it through proper channels, not secret meetings and half-truths. In the days leading up to the court-mandated mediation, Patricia worked meticulously. She assembled a comprehensive case, backed by evidence of Jonathan's evasiveness and questionable financial activity. Dominic provided a full dossier: suspicious wire transfers, shell company ties, aliases, and contacts with individuals rumored to be involved in laundering schemes. Every page of the report was a nail in the coffin of the illusion Rachel once believed in. Her stomach twisted as she read through bank statements showing money moved in the dead of night, as if trying to erase a trail. She felt betrayed, not just as a wife, but as a woman who once trusted blindly. Rachel's heart pounded each time she reviewed the files. It was a sobering reminder of how far their once idyllic marriage had fallen. On the morning of mediation, Rachel dressed in a modest navy suit. She wanted to appear calm, serious, composed. Marissa stayed behind with Adam, reassuring Rachel that she had everything under control. Outside the courthouse, gray clouds hung heavy, mirroring the atmosphere inside. The mediation took place in a sterile, windowless conference room. Rachel sat beside Patricia, across the table from Jonathan, who was flanked by a stern-looking attorney with square glasses and a tightly drawn expression. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Years of history lay between them, now reduced to documents and accusations. The court-appointed mediator, a middle-aged woman with a firm but gentle demeanor, opened the session by outlining the dispute. Rachel was seeking full custody and financial support for Adam. Jonathan had yet to formally respond, but claimed to possess evidence that would excuse or lessen his misconduct. When it was his turn, Jonathan repeated much of what he had said at the restaurant. Business deals, pressure, compromised partners. He insisted that Ariel was merely a business associate and that the financial transfers were strategic. His lawyer argued that Jonathan's assets were currently locked in delicate negotiations, and that awarding Rachel a large settlement could destabilize the company, potentially harming the family's long-term security. Rachel sat in stunned silence as she listened, not to the words, but to the cowardice laced beneath them. Her hands clenched under the table, every instinct telling her that Jonathan's version of protection was just another form of evasion. Rachel's frustration simmered beneath the surface. Even now, he was placing profits over parenthood. Patricia countered decisively. She laid out the records Dominic had uncovered: bank transactions, forged aliases, unexplained hotel expenses. Every document was time-stamped and supported by financial trails. One by one, she presented them, leaving little room for ambiguity. Jonathan's attorney tried to deflect, but it was clear the extent of Patricia's preparation had caught them off guard. The mediator's expression grew noticeably more serious. She turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice neutral but firm. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Reed. Are you prepared to address them?" The mediator asked, her tone firm. Sweat glistened on Jonathan's forehead. He glanced at his attorney, who leaned in and whispered something Rachel couldn't hear. After a pause, Jonathan spoke, his voice barely above a murmur. "I can't comment on every detail because of non-disclosure agreements and ongoing business negotiations. But I assure you, nothing I've done is illegal. Everything was done to protect our investments." Rachel's hands curled into fists on the table, her nails biting into her palms. The audacity of his words, spoken as if profits outweighed people, hit her like a slap. Rachel let out a sharp breath, her jaw tight. "I gave birth alone. I haven't seen a single dollar for our son's care. How is that protecting our investments?" She leaned forward. "Adam is not an investment. He's our son." Jonathan's tone hardened. "Don't make me the villain. You knew my business was high stakes. You knew it would require sacrifices." Her heart pounded in her chest, fury surging like wildfire. Patricia's voice cut through the room. "Leaving your wife alone in the hospital is not a business sacrifice. It's neglect." The mediator quickly raised her hand. "Let's bring this back to a productive discussion," she said, sensing the session unraveling. She proposed a temporary arrangement. Jonathan would provide a fixed amount of child support while the financial disclosures were sorted out. In exchange, Rachel would allow him supervised visitation with Adam. A future court date would determine permanent custody and asset division. Neither side was satisfied, but both agreed. It was a fragile truce. Rachel left the courthouse feeling a mix of emotions: relief that there was now a legal framework in place for Adam's care, and dread that this was only the beginning. As she walked out, she felt Jonathan's eyes on her, his stare heavy with unspoken intent. She could feel the chill of his gaze, not remorseful, but calculating, as if he were already plotting his next move. He wasn't done, and neither was the storm. In the following weeks, Jonathan made a few half-hearted efforts to see Adam under the court's supervision. The visits were held in a neutral setting, a child-friendly space at a local community center. Rachel watched from behind a glass panel, her emotions twisted into knots. Jonathan held Adam awkwardly, like a fragile piece of glass. Sometimes, he seemed touched by the baby's giggles or curious stares. Other times, his eyes wandered and his mind seemed elsewhere. Rachel couldn't tell if he was grappling with guilt or merely playing the part for legal appearances. Meanwhile, Dominic's investigation reached its breaking point. He uncovered damning emails, evidence that Jonathan had funneled investor money into extravagant purchases, including high-end gifts for Ariel Sutton. Even more troubling, the correspondence hinted at links to shady financiers already on law enforcement's radar for laundering money. Dominic urged Rachel to be extremely cautious. If federal investigators began digging into Jonathan's affairs, even the mansion could become subject to asset seizure. Sure enough, Jonathan's true colors resurfaced. One afternoon, as Rachel returned home from a supervised visit with Adam, she found a letter taped to the front gate. It was from Jonathan's attorney. The document demanded that she vacate the estate within 30 days. According to the letter, the mansion had been purchased before the marriage. Rachel had no legal claim to it. She was furious. Rachel immediately called Patricia, who calmly reassured her that Jonathan had no legal authority to evict her without a formal court order, especially not with a minor child involved. Still, her hands shook as she hung up the phone, the sheer cruelty of the letter echoing in her mind like a thunderclap. The home where she'd nursed Adam, where she'd cried herself to sleep, was now another weapon in Jonathan's arsenal. Still, the audacity of the maneuver rattled Rachel to her core. The next day, Marissa spotted Jonathan driving past the estate, Ariel Sutton seated beside him. As they slowed in front of the gate, Ariel smirked in Rachel's direction. It was the final straw. That night, Rachel sat beside Adam's crib, tears sliding down her cheeks. Fury and helplessness churned inside her. Jonathan was escalating the intimidation, trying to wear her down, to frighten her into submission. The soft hum of Adam's breath was the only thing anchoring her. She placed a hand on her chest, trying to calm her spiraling thoughts, but all she could feel was fire. But he had picked the wrong woman. Rachel made a quiet, fierce vow to herself. He would not win. She would see this through, no matter how long it took. She would expose every lie, every hidden crime. Then, just as she feared she was at her breaking point, fate shifted. Dominic sent a text. Need to meet. Big news. They met at a small, tucked-away cafe later that afternoon. Over tea, Dominic slid a thick folder across the table. Rachel opened it slowly and stared in disbelief. Inside were comprehensive records of Jonathan's illicit activities, forged contracts, layers of shell companies, and email exchanges clearly indicating money laundering schemes. Dominic had even managed to retrieve a private message where Jonathan openly boasted about outsmarting investigators and shielding his assets from seizure. Each line of text felt like a knife, carving away the last remnants of the man she thought she knew. Rachel's hands trembled as she turned page after damning page. It was worse than she had imagined. Jonathan's empire wasn't just flawed, it was criminal. She felt a wave of nausea thinking about the investors who had likely been duped, the trust he had shattered, the laws he had trampled. How many lives had he damaged in pursuit of his empire? How many others had he manipulated as effortlessly as he had her? No wonder he had been so desperate to keep her quiet. With Dominic's evidence in hand, Rachel met with Patricia. Together, they compiled a full report for the court. While Rachel knew it wasn't her job to pursue criminal charges, she understood that once these documents were submitted in the custody hearing, law enforcement wouldn't be far behind. And indeed, the shift came quickly. Within days, whispers that had long haunted Jonathan Reed's business reputation exploded into national headlines. Major news outlets ran exposés, tracing secretive money trails and interviewing whistleblowers, former employees who described how Jonathan had manipulated records and hidden transactions. The fall was swift and brutal. What had once seemed unshakable, his wealth, his image, his charm, was disintegrating before the world's eyes. The same public that once praised Jonathan as a brilliant tech innovator and generous donor now saw him as a fraud. In the chaos, Jonathan turned to the one person he had pushed away, Rachel. He flooded her voicemail with panicked messages. Rambling texts pleaded for her to help clear his name, to explain things to the press. He said he was misunderstood, that everything he did was for their future. But Rachel heard the truth in his timing. Jonathan only came crawling back once his empire began to crumble. He hadn't called from the hospital. He hadn't been there for Adam's birth. He only cared now that he had something to lose. Her heart didn't ache anymore. It burned with clarity. This wasn't about redemption. It was desperation. The final custody and financial hearing arrived on a crisp morning, with news vans and cameras clustered outside the courthouse, eager to catch a glimpse of the scandal-ridden entrepreneur and his estranged wife. Rachel stepped out of the car, dressed in a simple but elegant gray suit. Patricia walked beside her, clutching a folder that held the truth, neatly organized, impossible to ignore. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Jonathan appeared disheveled, his eyes shadowed by deep circles. The once confident image he maintained had crumbled. His attorney looked equally drained, papers askew and confidence waning. The judge presiding over the hearing reviewed the substantial evidence submitted by Patricia and Dominic. Rachel sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the bench as the judge delivered a stern reprimand. "Mr. Reed," the judge began, "your financial recklessness, paired with mounting evidence of possible criminal activity, presents a danger to the stability of your family. Ongoing investigations confirm the seriousness of these accusations." Then came the moment that made Rachel's breath hitch. "In light of your demonstrated pattern of deceit and emotional neglect," the judge continued, "this court awards full legal and physical custody of Adam Reed to Ms. Rachel Reed. Supervised visitation rights will be allowed under court-appointed oversight, pending further review." Rachel blinked rapidly as the magnitude of the ruling settled in. She had done it. Adam was safe. He was hers to protect, legally, wholly, and without question. The judge also ordered Jonathan to continue child support payments, with adjustments to be determined once his financial and legal circumstances were clarified by state investigators. The gavel struck with finality, echoing through the courtroom. It was over. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with media chaos. Reporters pushed microphones forward, shouting questions. Patricia stepped in, shielding Rachel from the crush. "No comment," she said firmly. "Please respect the privacy of the child." In the crowd, Rachel caught sight of Jonathan. He was flanked by his lawyer, trying to push past the flashing cameras. For a brief second, their eyes locked. In that glance, Rachel saw something in Jonathan's expression, a flicker of regret. Whether it was for losing his son, his wealth, or the image he had so carefully curated, Rachel couldn't say, and she didn't care to. What mattered now was the future. Rachel returned home and began rebuilding. She took on a remote position as a marketing consultant, working part-time to stay close to Adam. Marissa and her parents provided steady love and help, filling their home with warmth. Though the mansion was still technically under legal review and partially frozen due to Jonathan's financial probe, Rachel remained there for now. But the walls meant little to her. The real victory was peace. She had survived betrayal, isolation, and legal warfare. And in doing so, she had found something stronger than comfort: clarity. Each night, when she rocked Adam to sleep, there was no more trembling, no more dread. Just hope, just calm, and a mother who would never again be left in the dark. Jonathan would now have to face the consequences of his own actions. If he ever hoped to redeem himself, it would have to be from the ground up, stripped of illusions, and far from the empire he once built on secrecy and ambition. He would no longer hide behind boardrooms and facades, no longer manipulate narratives to suit his desires. The silence left in the wake of his collapse was deafening, and deserved. And so, the woman who had once been naive enough to believe in a fairy tale marriage found herself forging a new path. One shaped by the fires of betrayal and heartbreak, but also hardened by resilience and unconditional love. Each step she took now was deliberate, measured, not just in survival, but in healing. The strength she once doubted in herself had become the cornerstone of the life she was building. In the end, Jonathan Reed's downfall began the moment he abandoned his pregnant wife. And Rachel Reed's victory was sealed the moment she vowed never again to be powerless. Rachel's story is a reminder that real strength often emerges when life delivers its cruelest blows. From the despair of being left alone in her most vulnerable moment, through courtroom battles and revelations of deception, she never wavered. She stood firm to protect what mattered most: her child and her self-worth. She didn't just endure, she grew. She didn't just survive, she transformed. While Jonathan was consumed by greed and blinded by lies, Rachel carved a life of truth and independence, one that proved wealth could never replace loyalty, nor power substitute love. Today, her world may not be the perfect dream she once imagined, but it is real. And it is hers. A life full of hope, grounded in love, and built for a better future for her son, Adam. Let Rachel's journey inspire anyone navigating heartbreak or betrayal. You can rise, you can reclaim your power, and you can build a brighter tomorrow. If this powerful story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring these narratives to more people who might find strength and hope in them. Join our community for more compelling dramas, and together, let's celebrate the stories that connect and uplift us all. A billionaire's mistress demanded a divorce from his pregnant wife, but she had other plans. A single spark can unleash a storm of chaos, especially when betrayal and greed clash in the glittering halls of the city's elite. In this story, what looked like a flawless marriage teeters on the edge when an ambitious mistress wants more than secret encounters. She wants the wife gone. But she has no idea what she's up against. That wife is anything but naive, and she refuses to bend to some flashy ultimatum. Beneath crystal chandeliers, secrets twist, and a careful plan slowly forms in the shadows. One betrayal might open the gates to ruin, but how you fight back is what truly matters. Charlotte Alden once believed in fairy tale endings. She could still picture her wedding day like a classic movie scene. White lilies filling the church air with their sweet scent, her diamond-studded gown catching every beam of light, and her husband Graham Alden glowing with pride. Everyone had said they were the perfect match, and for a while she believed it too. At first, everything was bliss. Graham, a renowned venture capitalist, famous for turning small companies into global giants, had brought Charlotte into a life of private galas and five-star nights at luxury hotels like the Peninsula in Chicago. She was his anchor, he always told her, the calm center of his relentless ambition. He'd whisk her away to exclusive events at the Art Institute, impressing everyone with his charm and polished generosity. But beneath that shiny surface, small cracks formed. Subtle changes crept in. Late nights at the office turned routine, missed calls piled up, and an uneasy feeling nagged at Charlotte's heart. Graham had always been driven, but now there was a chill in the way he looked at her, like half his thoughts were somewhere else. Months before the truth broke open, Charlotte forced a bright smile at parties, pretending not to notice the lingering looks some of Graham's colleagues gave her. A wife's intuition is rarely wrong. She didn't know just how deep her suspicions would cut once they were confirmed. But every life-shifting storm starts with one drop. For Charlotte, that drop came as a call from an unknown number, late on a Friday night when her phone buzzed to life with a blocked caller ID. She was curled up in her reading nook, a cushioned armchair by the bay window, overlooking her carefully tended garden. The phone's sharp vibration startled her. For a second, she thought about ignoring it, but something tugged at her, an urge she couldn't explain. "Hello?" Charlotte said softly. Silence, then a woman's voice, low, assured. "Is this Charlotte Alden?" Charlotte's heartbeat stumbled. "Yes, may I ask who's calling?" The voice was sharp and smooth at once, radiating confidence. "I'm Camille Graham." She paused, just long enough for Charlotte's pulse to thunder in her ears. Camille's next words confirmed every fear Charlotte had buried deep. "Let's just say, I'm someone important to him." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. So this was it. The truth she'd half suspected, half prayed she'd imagined. Camille cleared her throat. "I'd like to meet. There's something you deserve to hear, and trust me, we're better off saying it face to face." One trembling hand clutched the phone tighter, the other gripped the armrest. Charlotte fought to keep her voice steady. "Are you saying you and Graham are having an affair?" "If you need me to spell it out, yes," Camille said, a bite creeping into her tone. "I'm done hiding. Meet me tomorrow at La Rue in downtown Chicago, noon. I'll text you the details." The line went dead. Charlotte lowered the phone, breath caught halfway in her throat. Her entire body turned cold, so it was real. She sat frozen, her hands pressed to her cheeks, her mind racing. The flawless life she'd fought so hard to hold together had finally cracked wide open. Morning came uneasy. Sunlight seeped through sheer curtains, while Charlotte dressed carefully in simple black trousers and a cream silk blouse. A pair of small pearl studs glimmered at her ears, neither too humble nor too showy. It felt like walking onto a battlefield, but she'd walk in with her head high. Inside La Rue, she spotted Camille instantly. The woman radiated curves and crimson lipstick, poured into an emerald dress meant to turn heads. Even in the restaurant's quiet sophistication, Camille glittered like a jewel under a spotlight. Charlotte forced a polite smile and stepped to the table where Camille sat, swirling a glass of white wine. The hostess gave Charlotte a discreet nod as she took her seat across from the other woman. "I was half afraid you wouldn't show," Camille said, voice calm as she twisted her wine glass by the stem. "I need answers," Charlotte said quietly, ignoring the untouched menu in front of her. Charlotte spoke softly, ignoring the untouched menu placed in front of her. Camille leaned forward, folding her arms on the table. I've been with Graham for almost a year now, Camille said, her tone smooth and sharp. He promised me a lot of things: love, security, a life where I wouldn't have to hide. Frankly, I'm done waiting. Charlotte felt her throat close up. Had it really been that long? Memories flashed behind her eyes. Nights when Graham came home late, reeking of expensive cologne, the faint trace of lipstick on his shirt collar. She had buried every suspicion, forced herself not to see what was in plain sight. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she held them back. A quiet, punishing thought slid through her chest. Did I drive him away? Was I too busy, too naive? Did I stop being enough? The doubt stung worse than Camille's venomous words. Camille pressed on, unmoved. He keeps me in the shadows because he's scared. He says it's about his reputation, his business deals, but really, he's scared of you. A bitter laugh broke through Charlotte's tight chest. Afraid of me? I'm just his wife. Camille's lips curled into a sly smile. You're more than that. You're respected. You have a name and influence. And let's not pretend. Your father sat on the city council for years. A lot of Graham's clout comes from you. You're no small obstacle. Charlotte's gaze dropped. It was true. She had always hated being seen as a piece on someone's chessboard, a connection to leverage. This conversation felt like a nightmare she'd stumbled into, scripted by someone else. So, Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper, what exactly do you want me to do? Camille didn't hesitate. Divorce him. Let him go so I can have him openly. Name your price. She leaned back, utterly unbothered. I know most of your money is tied up in trusts and investments, but we can work something out. Something inside Charlotte snapped. The arrogance, the cruelty, the way this woman dissected her life like it was just another deal to close. She had come here bracing for heartbreak, but she hadn't expected this cold demand. Charlotte lifted her chin. My marriage isn't a business contract you can renegotiate. If Graham wants a divorce, he can ask for it himself. Camille's expression shifted, her smug confidence tightening into mild irritation. He won't. He's too much of a coward. She tilted her head, voice dropping low. But I'm not. I came here, woman to woman, to make this clear. Charlotte's pulse thundered so loud she could hardly hear herself think. She swallowed hard. I'll talk to him tonight. Without waiting for a response, Charlotte stood up and walked away, refusing to give Camille the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Outside, storm clouds gathered overhead as she left the restaurant, each step echoing like a warning of what was about to unravel. She drove home, her eyes scanning every corner of the quiet neighborhood, as if somewhere in the familiar streets she might find a sign of what came next. Graham was nowhere to be found, probably in a board meeting, or worse, with Camille again. Charlotte paced the living room, fury boiling under her skin. But beneath the fury coiled something more treacherous, a tiny, gnawing dread that maybe she hadn't been enough. Had she grown boring? Predictable? She hated herself for even wondering. When Graham finally returned later that evening, he carried himself with casual ease, his tailored suit still crisp, hair neatly styled. He paused in the foyer, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her standing there, arms folded tight across her chest. Is something wrong? He asked, setting his briefcase down. Where have you been? Charlotte's tone cut like ice. He frowned slightly. Meetings. Why? She drew in a breath, steadying her voice so it wouldn't crack. I met Camille today. That name sliced through Graham's polished calm like a knife. His face darkened and the act fell away. You had no right, he started, then caught himself. How did you? She called me, Charlotte snapped, her voice trembling with rage she could barely contain. She told me everything. A year, Graham. A whole year of lying to my face, of humiliating me in this marriage. He stepped closer, voice low but urgent. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. The pathetic cliché made Charlotte want to scream. She forced herself to stand still, even as her words shook. She wants me to divorce you. His frustration cracked through. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in front of her. You think she can just waltz in here and replace you? Is that what you think I want? He paused, searching her face as if scrambling for an excuse. Charlotte, listen to me. I got carried away. At first it was just physical, but now she thinks. She thinks she owns you now, Charlotte finished for him, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Graham, you were everything to me. We built this life, this name, this future, together. If you wanted out, you could have told me. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back sharply. Charlotte, please. You have to understand, I needed something more. Our marriage felt stale. I know that doesn't make it right, but she almost laughed, a broken, bitter sound caught in her chest. How many nights had she spent planning charity galas while he was planning betrayal? How blind had she been? No more excuses. She hissed through clenched teeth. If you want a divorce, just say it. Don't send your mistress to negotiate for you. Graham exhaled, looking truly worn for the first time that night. I'm under a lot of pressure right now. There's a huge merger on the table. If any of this leaks, it could cost the company millions. Charlotte shook her head, bitter disbelief tightening her chest. Your empire. That's all you care about now, isn't it? We used to be a team, Graham. Now, it's just your money and your reputation. He hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously toward the staircase. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. I just need more time to think. Let me deal with Camille. I'll fix this. Charlotte stared at him, a sick wave of disgust churning in her gut. Time. After a year of betrayal, he still had the nerve to beg for more time. You'd better fix it fast, Graham, because if you don't, I swear I'll be the one to make sure you lose everything. And I mean everything. She brushed past him, the burn of betrayal driving every step. If he thought she would quietly disappear and surrender what was hers, he was in for the rudest awakening of his life. Darkness swallowed her bedroom that night. Charlotte stood at the window, staring out at Chicago's skyline. 1,000 city lights sparkling like distant secrets. Each light told a story. Hers felt stained beyond repair. She thought back to the early days, when love was still simple. Graham would surprise her with tickets to the symphony, or they'd stroll hand in hand along the Riverwalk after midnight, whispering about building a life untouched by the shallow power games of their old money families. Now those memories tasted bitter on her tongue. Graham cared about reputation above all else. The Alden name was stamped across charity galas, corporate mergers, scholarships bearing their family crest. Charlotte had lent her own social currency, her father's political ties, her polished grace at fundraisers, helping Graham's empire climb higher than either of them could have alone. She once believed they were true partners, that her poise balanced his drive. How naive she'd been. And then there was Camille, brazen, flawless, bold enough to march in and demand a divorce like it was a casual deal. Did Camille really love Graham, or just crave the power that came with becoming Mrs. Alden? Tears welled again, but Charlotte forced them back. Somewhere deep inside her, something turned cold and sharp as ice. She would not be cast aside from the life she had poured herself into. She would make sure both Camille and Graham learned, once and for all, that she was not some disposable ornament to be replaced at their convenience. Still, uncertainty hovered like a shadow. What move could she make? How could she protect her place without tearing herself apart in the process? As dawn crept in, Charlotte's mind drifted to the vows she once believed were unshakable, and a single question burned through her thoughts. What would it take to make them both pay? The next morning, she braced herself and drove to her father's stately townhouse. Richard Whitmore had once held a seat on Chicago's city council, and though he'd long stepped back from politics, his influence and connections were anything but dormant. Charlotte had never imagined asking for his network. It felt manipulative, too cold-blooded. But now everything had changed. "You look pale, sweetheart," Richard said the moment she stepped into his study, a warm, book-lined room filled with leather chairs and mementos from decades in city politics. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in concern. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then forced the words out. "I'm not well, Dad. Graham has been cheating on me." A muscle in Richard's jaw twitched. He reached out, wrapping her hand in his. "I always questioned that man's priorities. What do you need me to do?" Charlotte met her father's steady gaze. The words almost stuck in her throat. She hated this. Hated that she looked like the daughter who couldn't keep her own marriage together. A quiet shame pricked her spine. Am I a disappointment now? She forced the thought down. I'm not sure yet, but I need your help and your discretion, if I decide to. She stopped, the word catching in her throat. If I decide to divorce him, I want to know exactly what my options are, how to protect myself. Richard squeezed her hand reassuringly. You have my full support, no matter what you choose. When she left her father's townhouse, Charlotte felt a flicker of calm. She had resources, she had leverage, and knowledge, she reminded herself, was power. She wouldn't make any reckless moves, but she'd be ready. And the more she replayed Camille's shameless ultimatum, the more her anger hardened into sharp, deliberate resolve. Maybe the best way to fight an open threat was with a hidden snare. Days passed in tense quiet. Graham tiptoed around her, carefully avoiding Camille's name. Charlotte poured her energy into charity boards and volunteered for the Art Institute's community program, outwardly calm, impeccably poised. But each time her phone buzzed, her pulse jolted. Then, one afternoon, that same blocked number lit up her screen again. She was halfway through a meeting about an upcoming charity auction at the Drake Hotel. Murmuring a quick excuse, she slipped into a quiet hallway. Yes, she said tightly. Camille's voice crackled through the line, dripping with thinly veiled irritation. I gave you time to talk to Graham. What's the delay? Are you ready to discuss the divorce? Charlotte drew in a sharp breath. You don't get to dictate my life, Camille. A cold, humorless laugh echoed on the other end. The line hissed in her ear. You still don't get it, do you? He doesn't love you anymore. Every time he's with me, he complains about how cautious you are, how dull, how you can't keep him. A sharp sting of anger curled in Charlotte's gut, but she forced her voice to stay flat. Graham can say that to my face if he has the nerve. Camille's laugh was razor sharp. Please, he's terrified of your father's influence. Everyone knows that. But if you want your proof straight from the source, how about you join me at the Drake Hotel next week during the charity auction? I promise you'll get all the confirmation you need. Before Charlotte could answer, the line went dead. A wave of hot frustration tore through her chest. She pressed a hand to her collarbone, forcing her breathing to steady. Camille was setting up a scene, a public trap to humiliate her, corner her in front of Chicago's upper crust. But Charlotte would not be blindsided. She drew a deep breath, adjusted her expression, and rejoined the charity planning committee, her mind racing through every possible countermove. When the night of the auction arrived, the Drake Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a glittering oasis. A string quartet played beneath sweeping crystal chandeliers, while Chicago's elite mingled, whispered bids on priceless artwork, and clinked champagne flutes. Charlotte stepped through the grand double doors in a sleek midnight blue gown with a modest high neckline and a subtle train that trailed elegantly behind her. Her hair was pinned into an immaculate chignon, diamond earrings flickering with every turn of her head. She could feel eyes following her, some sympathetic, some full of gossip. Rumors had already started to swirl, and she knew it. Across the room, Graham stood among a circle of business leaders, looking every bit the charming mogul in a crisp black tuxedo. The moment he caught sight of her, he excused himself and crossed the floor, tension rippling in the set of his shoulders. Charlotte, he murmured, forcing a warm, easy grin. You look breathtaking tonight. She accepted the compliment with a polite nod. We need to talk. But before he could respond, the buzz of conversation fractured as Camille appeared, making her entrance like a starlet on a stage. Draped in a scarlet gown that hugged every curve, she strolled forward, basking in the sharp attention her presence commanded. She paused just within reach, eyes flicking coyly between Charlotte and Graham as she raised a glass of champagne to her lips. Charlotte's pulse thudded hard. The triangle was complete, and people noticed. A ripple of hushed whispers danced through the room. Graham shot Camille a warning look, but she only tilted her head, her smile sharp and feline. I see you both made it, Camille purred, her voice dripping with sugary mockery. What a delightful surprise, Charlotte said evenly, finding her composure despite the eyes now drifting their way. Camille, this is neither the time nor the place for private affairs. Oh, I disagree, Camille countered smoothly, her tone carrying just enough bite to draw a few curious glances. I think this is the perfect backdrop. Donations flowing, champagne sparkling. What better way to show I'm serious about claiming my rightful place? Her eyes flicked to Graham, daring him. You do want me beside you, don't you? Graham shifted uneasily. voice low, his polished charm slipping. "Camille, stop. Not here." But Camille had no intention of stopping. She stepped closer to Charlotte, her perfume sharp and cloying. She dropped her voice to a venomous whisper. "I know about the trusts in your name, and the estate you inherited in Lake Forest. If you're smart, you'll sign the divorce papers and disappear quietly. Your father's pull won't save you if you're too stubborn to accept reality." Charlotte's eyes darted around the grand ballroom. Several guests pretended to admire paintings, but their prying ears were obvious. Heat crept up her neck, but she refused to flinch. She locked eyes with Camille, calm as polished steel. "You think you know everything about me, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." Camille arched an eyebrow, her smirk dripping poison. Bold words for a woman clinging to a dead marriage. In that instant, Charlotte understood. She couldn't afford rage or tears. She needed strategy, the same ruthless focus Graham wielded in boardrooms. She let a serene smile lift her lips. "Enjoy the rest of the auction. I'll see you both afterward." With that, she pivoted on her heel, spine straight, gown sweeping behind her like a silken threat. She would not make a scene tonight, but she would not leave this battlefield undefended either. The night was far from over. Her plan was just beginning to unfold. Slipping out of the ballroom's hum of music and gossip, Charlotte moved down a hushed corridor to a small plush lounge tucked behind velvet drapes. There, under the muted gold light, she pulled out her phone and dialed her father's private line. "Dad? It's me," she whispered. She laid out the situation in quick, controlled words, requesting one discreet favor she knew only Richard Whitmore could pull off cleanly. Richard's voice was grave but steady. "Are you certain about this, Charlotte? Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back." Her pulse hammered in her throat, but her reply was clear, steady, final. "I'm sure. It's the only way to protect myself and remind them both exactly who they underestimated." Ending the call, she drew a deep breath, her resolve sharpening like a blade. She wasn't entirely sure how each piece would fall into place, but she knew she had to move swiftly. This was unfamiliar territory, a high-stakes game with no room for missteps. Returning to the grand ballroom, Charlotte slipped effortlessly back into the role everyone expected. She mingled with donors, laughed lightly with old family friends, and radiated the polished charm of a devoted socialite wife. Beneath the flawless facade, however, her eyes swept the room again and again, searching for Graham and Camille, determined not to be blindsided. At last, she found them standing near a carved marble column. Camille was pressed in close to Graham, her posture dripping with possessiveness. Graham looked caught, face flushed with frustration and a hint of shame. Charlotte didn't move toward them. She knew she had already planted the seeds of suspicion and unease in both of them. Let them stew, she thought. Let them wonder what she'd do with Camille's bold threats. As the evening stretched on, the final auction items were claimed. Applause rang through the gilded ballroom, and Charlotte slipped away from the gathering, leaving a wake of whispered curiosity behind her. The stage was set. Now, she just had to wait for the next domino to fall. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte maintained a flawless front. She attended charity luncheons, hosted quiet afternoon teas with old friends, and even made carefully orchestrated public appearances with Graham. The tabloids gobbled it up, printing fresh photos of Chicago's golden couple, never suspecting the war brewing behind their mansion's closed doors. Meanwhile, Camille escalated her offensive. She left taunting voicemails on Charlotte's phone, forwarded snide text exchanges with Graham, and threatened to leak everything to the press. Charlotte saved each message, filing them away like ammunition. Beneath her calm exterior, she found an unfamiliar steadiness, powered by the fact that, quietly, she had begun securing her own finances and reinforcing her social standing without Graham's name attached. Graham, meanwhile, unraveled under Camille's relentless demands. He bounced between frantic meetings with his attorneys, desperate to figure out whether to rush a divorce or pay Camille off before she torched his spotless public image. He tried to placate Camille, but she had shed all pretense of discretion. She wanted the wife out. One evening, Graham cornered Charlotte in the study of their penthouse. The tall windows reflected the Chicago skyline back at them, the city's glow a harsh echo of the tension tightening the room. "What's your plan, Charlotte?" he demanded, voice clipped and strained. Camille's threatening to go public. She wants me to file for divorce immediately. If this breaks, it'll kill the deals I've been working on for months. Charlotte turned slowly from the window, meeting his eyes without flinching. Oh, so now you care what I think? Charlotte shot back, her words sharp enough to draw blood. Maybe you should have worried about consequences before you cheated on me for an entire year. Graham dragged a hand down his face, looking worn for the first time in forever. Charlotte, please. I know I've said it all before, but I need your help. Can't we settle this quietly? Her cold stare sliced through him. You want me to save you from the mess you made? How convenient. His voice rose, tinged with desperation. Yes, I know I'm selfish, I've been a damn fool, but please, let's figure out a settlement. I'll give you whatever you want, just don't blow this up. Charlotte let out a short, humorless laugh, the sound brittle as glass. Whatever I want? You really think this is just about money? She stepped closer, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. You humiliated me, Graham. You used me, my family, my connections to build your image, and now you expect me to disappear quietly while you parade your mistress around Chicago? He edged closer, hands half raised in a pacifying gesture. It's not like that. Look, I'm trying to negotiate. This is about protecting what we've built, my company, your reputation. Nobody wins if this blows up. Charlotte held his gaze, her expression unreadable. Inside, though, a storm raged. She could almost hear the echoes of every promise he'd ever whispered, promises that now felt cheap and hollow. Part of her wanted to shout, to hurl every cruel truth in his face, to see him squirm under the weight of what he'd done. But instead she buried it all under an icy mask, refusing to let him see the depth of her raw hurt. Then she spoke, her tone deadly calm. Be careful, Graham. You're standing on the edge of losing everything. And you're right. None of us wins if this goes up in flames. For a moment, neither said a word. The heavy hush of the study pressed in around them, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Then Charlotte brushed past him, her parting words cold and final. But maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Charlotte's next move was to call in help from a source Graham would never expect. Elizabeth Ashcroft, a longtime ally of her father's, and one of Chicago's most feared divorce attorneys. Elizabeth was legendary for dismantling high-profile marriages with surgical precision and ensuring her clients walked away stronger than before. In Elizabeth's marble and mahogany office, Charlotte laid out every gritty detail of the affair, the threats, and Graham's pleas. Elizabeth listened, calm and hawk-eyed, nodding only when necessary. When Charlotte finished, Elizabeth leaned back, fingertips pressed together. You're in a very strong position, Charlotte. The courts tend to favor the betrayed spouse, especially when significant assets and a prenup are involved. His affair will weaken any leverage he thinks he has. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. We did sign a prenup, but it was straightforward, divided what each of us brought in. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. True, but you have far more than that. Your father's political influence, your own inheritance, your impeccable charity record. All of it frames you as the dignified victim and him as the reckless fool. All of that strengthens your position, Elizabeth said, her tone crisp, eyes sharp as a scalpel. And don't underestimate the weight of the evidence. The text messages, phone logs, even suspicious bank transfers. Adultery proven on paper will heavily tilt negotiations in your favor. Charlotte let out a slow breath. He keeps saying he wants to settle quickly to avoid scandal, but Camille is pushing him to force me out. She has no fear of going public. Elizabeth's smile was razor thin, the glint in her eyes unmistakable. Then let her. We'll counter with everything we have. And listen carefully. Under no circumstances do you sign a single page without my approval. If needed, I'll draft a counterclaim citing emotional distress and reputational harm. A strange but welcome wave of calm settled over Charlotte. She rose, shook Elizabeth's steady hand, and walked out of the towering law office more grounded than she'd felt in weeks. She finally had a legal ally capable of dismantling Camille's reckless threats, piece by piece. For the first time, the power felt squarely in her hands. As Camille's provocations escalated, new messages, new taunts, a final clash felt unavoidable. It came sooner than Charlotte expected. A terse text from Camille demanding they meet at a sleek cafe off Michigan Avenue. Charlotte didn't flinch. She decided it was time to face the mistress again. This time with steel in her spine and a legal arsenal ready to strike. When she arrived at the minimalist cafe, she spotted Camille instantly. Designer blouse, glossy hair, and an untouched espresso in a white porcelain cup. The moment Charlotte slid into the opposite seat, the air bristled with unspoken hostility. "You're late," Camille snapped, setting her cup down a little too hard. Charlotte crossed her legs, her expression smooth as glass. "I'm here now, let's get to the point." Camille didn't bother with niceties. "Graham wants this divorce finalized, but you're dragging it out. Why? Do you like tormenting him?" A cool smile tugged at Charlotte's lips. "What I enjoy is irrelevant. This marriage won't end on your timeline, Camille." Camille's perfectly shaped brow lifted, her confidence flickering into annoyance. "He's mine now. You're just the wife on paper." Charlotte laughed, soft and dismissive. "Let's see if he stays so eager when the attorneys start their work. By the time I'm through, you and Graham may be scraping pennies together, if you're lucky." Camille's eyes darkened, her voice low and furious. "Money isn't my only reason for this. I care about him." "Spare me the fairy tale," Charlotte cut in, her tone like frost. "If this were just about love, you wouldn't be threatening me at every turn. But fine. If you truly care, tell Graham to grow a spine and ask for the divorce himself. Until then, stay out of my affairs." Camille's hand smacked the table, rattling her cup. A few nearby customers paused mid-sip, drawn by the rising tension at the corner table. Camille leaned in, voice dripping venom. "You think you're untouchable because of your father's name? Your fancy lawyers? I'll drag your reputation through every tabloid in Chicago if I have to." Charlotte leaned forward too, her voice barely above a whisper but lethal all the same. "Try it. You'll find out just how deep the mud can get, Camille." Camille's glare could have scorched straight through the polished oak tabletop. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words failing her for once. Sensing she'd struck a nerve, Charlotte straightened, smoothing an invisible crease on her coat. "This conversation is over. Keep playing your little games if you want, but don't expect me to play by your rules." Without waiting for an answer, she turned on her heel and walked out, each step a quiet echo of her new, ironclad resolve. If Camille thought threats and gossip would scare her off, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Back home that evening, Charlotte received unexpected news. Her father, Richard Whitmore, had quietly tasked a trusted contact to dig into Camille's past. The findings were more damning than she'd imagined. Camille wasn't just an opportunistic socialite. She had a history, affairs with wealthy, connected men, always leaving behind broken engagements and discreet hush-money settlements. None of her past conquests, however, had been as high-profile as Graham Alden. Even more telling, Richard uncovered records showing Camille had racked up massive personal debt right before latching on to Graham. This was no accidental fling. It was a calculated pattern, securing financial safety through seduction and leverage. A sick swirl of disgust and cautious relief twisted in Charlotte's chest. This gave her ammunition, real leverage. She didn't waste a second, forwarding everything to Elizabeth Ashcroft. Elizabeth replied within the hour. Her email laid out in neat bullet points how Camille's history of manipulative relationships and hidden debts could be used to dismantle any claim she had on Graham's fortune. But the true shock came later that night. When Elizabeth called directly, her voice urgent. "There's more, Charlotte. Our private investigator found evidence, phone logs, credit card charges, suggesting Camille may be blackmailing Graham. She's threatened to leak sensitive information about his business dealings unless he finalizes the divorce quickly." A chill spread through Charlotte's veins. It explained so much. Graham's paranoia about leaks, the frantic meetings, the sudden urgency to keep Camille quiet. If she had access to confidential documents, he'd be desperate to keep her on a short leash. The puzzle pieces clicked together, revealing a picture far worse than an ordinary affair. This was extortion, hidden behind a silk dress and a coy smile. Camille was no mere scorned mistress. She was an opportunist, cunning, shameless, and now Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Some deeper rot in Graham's world that he'd hidden even from her. She confronted him that night in their living room. Soft lamplight cast fractured shadows over the polished floors and elegant furnishings, but nothing could soften the tension clawing at the air between them. "I know about Camille's blackmail," Charlotte said, her voice just shaky enough to betray how deeply this cut her. "She's threatening to expose your business deals, isn't she?" Graham's eyes flew wide. "How? Who told you?" She lifted a hand, cutting him off coldly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is you've risked everything we built because you couldn't keep your ego or anything else in check." His expression twisted, half guilt, half raw frustration. "I'm trying to handle it, but she's out of control. She got her hands on files connected to a major merger. If she leaks it, I could be charged with securities fraud." Charlotte's stomach dropped. This was worse than she'd feared. How did she even get access? Graham raked both hands through his hair, pacing like a man cornered. "She dug through my briefcase, hacked my emails apparently. She's not just some reckless fling, she's smart, smarter than I gave her credit for." Charlotte stood frozen, absorbing every brutal word. Then something hardened inside her, cold, focused. "You need to come clean. File for a restraining order. Bring in the authorities if you have to. I won't stand by while she holds our entire world hostage." Graham shook his head so hard it bordered on panic. "No, you don't get it. If the police or the SEC start sniffing around, every document I've touched will be dissected. Even the smallest error could ruin me, ruin us." For a heartbeat, her fury faltered. Charlotte knew what it meant. The Alden wealth wasn't just vanity. It funded their philanthropic work, supported employees, even paid for community grants and scholarships. If Graham's empire fell, so would all the people tied to it. She stepped closer, voice low and clear. "Then what's your plan, Graham? Just let Camille keep squeezing you dry?" He stared at her helplessly, sweat beading near his temple. "I need time. To get the files back somehow. To stop her. But she's demanding I sign the divorce papers right now. She thinks if I make you leave, she'll have more leverage." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, her voice edged with steel. "So she's extorting you to force me out, and you're really going to let her?" Graham's voice cracked under the weight of his own mess. I don't know, Charlotte." She regarded him coolly as if seeing him fully for the first time. "If you cave to her now," Charlotte said icily, "then forget my help keeping this quiet. And trust me, if I walk away, everything else you're clinging to will come down with me." Graham's shoulders sagged, stripped of his practiced composure. "Then help me, Char. You've always been the sharpest person I know. If we can't involve the police, we need something else, something to force her hand." Charlotte drew a deep breath, a riot of feelings crashing inside her. Even after all the betrayal, she couldn't ignore the memory of the partnership they once were. Two people who'd built something remarkable together. She had no desire to watch him lose it all to Camille's games. "Fine," she said at last, her voice quiet but unyielding. "But you'll do exactly what I say." A week later, after discreet planning with Elizabeth Ashcroft and her father Richard, Charlotte and Graham orchestrated a trap that had to look perfectly genuine. They arranged a meeting at a private suite in the Waldorf Astoria, Chicago, known for its impeccable privacy and old-money luxury. Word was leaked, just carefully enough, that a settlement was being finalized, and Graham intended to ensure Charlotte walked away with as little as possible. The bait was set. Camille arrived at the suite, brimming with smug satisfaction, draped in a sleek black cocktail dress that shimmered with each step. She practically glowed with triumph when she caught sight of the slim stack of paperwork waiting on the coffee table, though she tried to mask it with a bored flick of her hair. Graham stood by the tall window, the city lights reflecting off the glass behind him. He looked tense, drained. Charlotte sat on a velvet sofa, head bowed slightly, the perfect picture of a defeated wife. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Camille purred, shutting the door behind her. "I trust everything's in order?" Graham nodded stiffly, gesturing to the paperwork. "Charlotte and I have agreed on the terms. She's ready to finalize the divorce quietly." Camille's eyes darted between them, something calculating flashing beneath her confident smirk. "And the merger files, Graham? Don't forget who's holding your future in their pretty little hands." He swallowed, glancing briefly at Charlotte before nodding. "That's part of the deal. You'll get the transfer and the claims, just as soon as this is done. Charlotte forced out a weary sigh. Let's just get this over with. Camille glided closer, eyeing the documents with open greed. She shot Charlotte a venomous smile. Did you really think you could keep him with your money and that uptight charm? You can't buy passion, sweetheart. Maybe next time, learn how to please your man. The barb sliced deep, but Charlotte's expression didn't so much as flicker. She calmly picked up the pen, hand steady. Behind her, Graham turned to the bar, fumbling with the whiskey decanter, his hand visibly trembling. Then, in one smooth movement, Charlotte swapped the top sheet with an entirely different set of papers, her trap falling perfectly into place. Camille's attention flickered to her phone, fingers tapping out what was likely a gleeful message to some confidant, bragging about the prize she thought she'd just snatched away. She didn't notice Charlotte calmly signing a document that wasn't what it appeared to be. Elizabeth Ashcroft had prepared this particular set of papers with surgical precision. It held no legal weight for dissolving the marriage, but was instead crafted as a clever snare. Buried in the legalese was a subtle yet binding admission of Camille's threats, extortion, and unauthorized access to Graham's confidential files. Charlotte set the pen down with an air of weary surrender and pushed it across the table. Fine. Let's be thorough. I want your signature too, acknowledging that in exchange for my quiet departure, you waive any accusations against me, now or in the future. Camille frowned, skimming the paragraphs half-heartedly. The dense legal language made her eyelids droop, but the bolded, underlined heading, Settlement Agreement, was all she needed to feel certain of her triumph. Confidence gleamed in her eyes. Inside, Charlotte's pulse thudded so hard she could feel it echo in her throat, but her face stayed perfectly serene. She forced herself to hold Camille's smug gaze, burying a thrill of satisfaction deep beneath her composed exterior. This was her moment. Finally, she would watch the woman who'd tried to steal everything walk straight into her own trap. She had won, or so she believed. With a satisfied flick of her wrist, Camille signed her name with a flourish. Barely had the pen left the page when a knock echoed through the suite. The door swung open to reveal Elizabeth Ashcroft, Richard Whitmore beside her, flanked by two sharply dressed security consultants. Camille's head snapped up, her smug expression dissolving into startled alarm. What the hell is this? Elizabeth advanced with a calm, lethal grace. Thank you, Miss Graham. We have precisely what we need. She plucked the freshly signed document from the table, scanning it with a pleased nod. Camille's eyes darted wildly from Graham to Charlotte, dread replacing her false bravado. You tricked me. You? Charlotte's lips curved into the faintest hint of a victorious smile, her eyes never leaving Camille's panicked face. Graham stepped forward, voice heavy with a remorse he didn't bother to hide. I'm sorry, Camille, but you left us no other choice. Elizabeth faced Camille directly, her tone crisp as a judge's gavel. The document you just signed is not a divorce agreement. It's a formal statement acknowledging your role in threatening this marriage and illegally accessing Mr. Alden's confidential business information, among other acts. She tapped the page for emphasis. It includes a sworn affidavit of malicious intent. You've effectively admitted to blackmail, Miss Graham. All the color drained from Camille's face. You can't do this. This is entrapment. Elizabeth raised a single, cold eyebrow. On the contrary, you came here of your own free will, believing you had coerced Charlotte and Graham into your terms. I assure you the courts will see it the same way. Now we have written, signed proof of your extortion attempts, Elizabeth said evenly. Camille scrambled for her purse, likely reaching for her phone, but one of the suited security men stepped in, blocking her path with calm authority. We'll need that, Miss Graham. Charlotte watched her with a mixture of cold relief and the last embers of raw anger still smoldering in her chest. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her tailored skirt. You threatened to tear my life apart. You tried to force my hand. Now you'll live with the consequences. Camille's wild eyes darted desperately to Graham. You can't let them do this. You love me. Graham's face twisted, guilt and exhaustion weighing on every word. His hands shook at his sides. I made a mistake, Camille. I never loved you. I was weak. But I won't let you destroy Charlotte or me any longer. The last flicker of false hope died in Camille's expression. She lunged for the coffee table, grabbing at the stack of merger files she still believed were her ace in the hole, only to find blank pages. A decoy. Her face contorted in pure rage, but the security team stepped closer, cutting off any escape. Elizabeth's voice was cool as frost. You can choose to quietly surrender any real stolen material and sign a non-disclosure agreement. In return, we may decide not to pursue the maximum charges. Resist, and I promise the evidence we have will bury you in court. Camille's fury fractured into a silent, trembling defeat. She collapsed back into a chair, the weight of reality crashing down around her. Charlotte watched every second of Camille's collapse, feeling a sharp, almost feral satisfaction twist low in her chest. But under the surface, exhaustion flooded in too, a bone-deep ache for every sleepless night, every betrayal she'd had to swallow just to stand here today. The part of her that longed for vengeance felt sated. The part that longed for peace felt impossibly tired. Graham moved hesitantly to Charlotte's side. For a moment, their eyes met. Two people acknowledging the wreckage they now stood among. Charlotte drew herself upright, refusing to let any flicker of misplaced sympathy soften the truth of what had been done to her. The woman who once smirked so brazenly now sat shaking, her future reduced to nothing but an ugly cautionary tale. Karma, swift and merciless, had arrived. With Camille cornered and her blackmail scheme neutralized, Elizabeth and Richard oversaw her removal from the suite, escorting her to a private room where she'd be forced to hand over any remaining stolen files. If she cooperated, she'd leave with scraps. If not, prison was waiting. Charlotte stood motionless, arms folded tightly across her chest. The suite felt cavernous, strangely hollow now that the storm had passed. Graham lingered by the window, his shoulders hunched, the confident spark in his eyes dulled and weary. Deep stress lines carved into his face told the rest of the story. A king stripped down to a man who nearly lost everything. When the door finally closed behind Camille and the others, silence swallowed the room. Charlotte crossed to the sofa and sank down gracefully, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. Relief hummed under her skin. She'd won. But victory, she realized, could still taste like ashes. Graham turned toward her slowly, eyes filled with a regret so raw it seemed to age him right there in the soft lamplight. Charlotte, I don't even know what to say. She lifted her gaze, exhaustion shadowing her features. Then don't say anything. You got what you wanted. Camille won't ruin your deals, and I won't be dragged through a humiliating divorce, publicly at least. He moved closer, cautious, as if afraid he might break her further by proximity alone. He sat down beside her, clasping his hands in his lap. The damage I caused is beyond forgiveness, but for what it's worth. I see now how badly I took you for granted. Camille was never worth losing you. Charlotte stared at him, blinking against the sting at the corners of her eyes. You lost me the moment you chose her. Everything we just did, it was to protect what little dignity I had left. And yes, a part of me still cares. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. A dull ache pressed behind her ribs, a part of her screaming to ask why he hadn't seen her worth before tearing them apart. She forced the words back, refusing to let fresh hurt muddy her resolve. He had to feel every ounce of the cost. Pain flickered across Graham's face, a fresh wound he knew he'd carved himself. I understand. She drew in a long breath, gathering the last shreds of her composure. We've neutralized the threat. Now comes the real question. What happens next? Do we actually try to piece this marriage back together, or has too much been broken? He hesitated, voice trembling on the edge of hope and defeat. I want to fix this, but only if you want to. Charlotte closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing into her bones. Graham, you shattered my trust. Even if I stay, I can't pretend this will ever be what it once was. And the most terrifying truth of all, she still wanted to believe him. Some soft, stubborn piece of her heart longed to find the man she'd married, buried beneath all the lies. That weakness shamed her almost as much as his betrayal. In the quiet between them, she hated how her heart still recognized the warmth in his eyes. A warmth she'd once trusted more than her own instincts. She needed him to understand that trust was of a fortress rebuilt brick by brick, not begged back overnight. Tentatively, he reached for her hand. For a heartbeat, she let him hold it, remembering softer days, promises whispered under city lights. Then, gently, she pulled away. In the days that followed Camille's downfall, Elizabeth confirmed that Camille had grudgingly surrendered every stolen file to avoid prosecution. She'd signed an airtight NDA, forfeiting any chance to sue and forced to accept a modest hush payment, a pittance compared to what she'd schemed to gain. With Camille gone, the city buzzed with hushed speculation. Rumors of a mistress floated in whispered corners, but no concrete evidence surfaced. Graham's company survived unscathed, the scandal dissolving almost as quickly as it had erupted. Yet for Charlotte, the hardest part remained, deciding whether to stay. Rebuilding trust with Graham seemed insurmountable. She weighed every option, consulting Elizabeth, confiding in her father Richard, and listening to her closest friends, who offered everything from fierce calls to leave him forever to gentle encouragement for counseling. Then, one evening, Graham surprised her. He asked her to meet him at the very place where, all those years ago, they'd first whispered "I love you." It was a weathered bench in Lincoln Park, near the conservatory garden, where he'd once promised her forever under blooming spring magnolias. When she arrived, she found the bench adorned with a bouquet of fresh white roses, lit softly by the glow of an old lamppost. Standing there, Graham met her eyes. No mask, no armor, just a man stripped bare. "I know," he said, voice breaking. "I don't deserve a second chance." "Not really," he began, voice trembling but unwavering. "I need you to hear me, Charlotte. You mean more to me than every business deal, every fleeting thrill. I was arrogant, stupid. I threw away our marriage for something worthless." She stayed silent, letting him pour it out. "I'd do anything to make it right," Graham said, desperation threading through every word. "If you want a legal separation, I won't fight it. If you want counseling, I'll go. If you want me to pull back from the company to be more present, I will. I'm begging you to consider trying, not for what we were, but for what we could still be." Charlotte's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "You can't undo what you did. Love alone isn't enough. It needs respect. It needs honesty. You broke both." He stepped closer, voice cracking. "Give me time to earn them back. I know it won't happen overnight. I'm prepared to fight for you, as long as it takes." A quiet war raged in her chest, between a heart that still knew his touch and a mind that refused to forget every lie, every stolen night. Part of her wanted to believe him, to surrender to the familiar comfort of old promises. But another part, stronger now, braced itself. Forgiveness would not be a gift handed over easily. He would have to carve it out, one truth at a time. And buried beneath her armor, an older fear throbbed awake. What if he failed her again? What if she opened the door just enough for him to tear her apart a second time? The thought terrified her more than being alone ever could. For a fragile moment, Charlotte's mind slipped back to the man she fell for. The one who used to call her from red-eye flights just to say he missed her, who scribbled silly notes and tucked them into her coat pocket. She had always believed people could change, if they truly wanted to, but trust didn't grow back overnight. "I'm not saying yes," she whispered, voice barely carrying over the breeze in the park. "But I'm not saying no either. You'll have to prove it. Every day. Show me the man I fell in love with." Graham nodded, tears in his own eyes now, unashamed. "I will. I swear it." With the storm finally behind her, Charlotte found a new clarity, a reason to turn her scars into something stronger. She poured her energy, her inheritance, and her hard-earned wisdom into launching a foundation to empower other women who found themselves manipulated, silenced, or trapped. She named it the Aurora Foundation, symbolizing the dawn after the darkest night. At the gala launch held at the Art Institute of Chicago, Charlotte took the stage in a breathtaking gold gown that shimmered under the museum's spotlights. The audience, a sea of philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and city leaders, fell silent as she began. Too often, women are left voiceless and powerless, financially and emotionally. Tonight, I stand here not as a victim, but as proof that we can reclaim our power. She paused, her voice steady, resolute. The Aurora Foundation will provide legal aid, seed funding for female entrepreneurs, and mentorship programs. We want to ensure that no woman stays in a destructive situation because she feels she has no choice. From tonight on, she will always have options. The applause that rose in answer thundered through the marble hall. In the front row, Graham watched her, pride and lingering sorrow tangled in his eyes. painfully aware of the strength he'd almost destroyed. As Charlotte stepped down from the podium, she felt it, a freedom, a future that belonged to her alone, no matter what came next. He approached her tentatively when the final round of applause faded into soft murmurs. "That was incredible," Graham said quietly, his voice touched with something like awe. "I'm proud of you, truly." Charlotte offered him a polite, almost distant smile. "This is something I should have done long ago. Maybe I just needed the right storm to push me." He reached out to gently squeeze her hand, a small, hopeful gesture. But she drew back subtly, ever mindful of the watchful eyes around them. They stood together in public now, but between them stretched a careful, fragile expanse neither could cross too quickly. Yet the Aurora Foundation's triumph opened a horizon Charlotte had once only dreamed of. She was no longer just Mrs. Alden, the polished socialite wife behind a powerful man. She was her own force now, capable of standing alone if she had to. And if Graham truly wanted to remain in that future, he'd have to earn the right. Months later, word trickled back to Charlotte about Camille. She had tried, predictably, to ensnare another wealthy target, but her infamy preceded her. The NDA she'd signed muzzled her tongue, but couldn't salvage her ruined name. No high-profile man wanted the stain of a known blackmailer on his arm. Her posh apartment was gone, the hush money drying up fast. Rumors floated that she was couch surfing with an old friend, jobless, broke, and unwelcome. Once the predator, now the pariah. Karma had done its work thoroughly. Meanwhile, Charlotte's own life took on a momentum she hadn't dared envision before. The Aurora Foundation launched its first series of leadership workshops, helping women claim their place at corporate tables. Invitations for her to speak rolled in from conferences across the country. Each stage another reminder that her voice, once nearly drowned, now rang louder than ever. At home, Graham kept his promise. Therapy, both alone and with her, week after week. He had grown quieter, softer. Sometimes he waited up for her late at night with tea, asking, genuinely, about her day. Little by little, she allowed him these gentle gestures of penance. But her heart remained under lock and key, guarded until time and truth proved they belonged together again, if they ever did. Some nights, alone in the soft hush of her bedroom, Charlotte would lie awake tracing old memories like ghostly scars beneath her ribs. Forgiveness, she realized, was not a door she could fling wide open. It was a door Graham would have to knock on, again and again, until she was sure she could stand behind it without fear. They found, instead, a cautious companionship. A truce built not on illusions, but on fragile honesty and a renewed respect for each other's ambitions. Whether their marriage would heal completely, neither could say. But they both knew redemption would never come cheap. One quiet evening, Charlotte found herself back in her favorite nook by the bay window. The setting sun washed the Chicago skyline in hues of amber and rose. She rested her hand against the glass, her mind drifting back through every betrayal, every moment of rage and quiet cunning, and finally to the iron-edged triumph she'd carved for herself. She had lost and regained everything that mattered most: her voice, her power, and her unwavering sense of self. And whatever tomorrow brought, she knew this much: she would never lose them again. The cost had been steep, but Charlotte emerged stronger, wiser. She learned the hardest truth of all. Love without respect is just a fragile illusion waiting to shatter. And no matter how dark the storm, true power often rises when you're backed against the wall with nothing left but your resolve. So that's where this story closes, my incredible friends. Are you still here with me right now? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, something in Charlotte's journey has touched your heart too. Sometimes life tears us apart right at the seams we thought were unbreakable. Sometimes betrayal leaves us gasping for air in our own home, among our own people. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Charlotte's strength didn't come from being unhurt, it came from standing tall, despite the hurt. Maybe you too have faced days when trust crumbled, when your worth felt invisible, when you wanted to disappear. And maybe you're learning, like Charlotte did, that your power is yours alone. No betrayal can steal it forever. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Charlotte didn't just fight a mistress and a cheating husband, she fought the lies she once told herself. That she was only worthy if she kept everyone happy. That silence was safer than standing up. In the end, she reclaimed her voice and turned her scars into a foundation to lift others. So tonight, if you're still here, I hope you carry this truth into tomorrow. You are never just what they say about you. You are never just someone's ornament. You are the whole masterpiece, flaws, storms, and all. If this story kept you reading until this final word, then help us keep telling more stories that remind us all how resilient the human spirit can be. Click like, share this with someone who needs courage tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale that might just change your perspective. From my heart to yours, thank you for staying until the end. May you always find the power to rewrite your own ending.